And so we're going to be talking about exactly what you just said and get into it. So you got Jason and myself, we're the co-founders of OmniLab. And so been around 3 years. We've worked with more than 100 different B2B SaaS brands. And so typically Series A to Series C. So we've seen a lot of what works, what doesn't work. And so we're going to try to share as many practical and tactical kind of next steps in terms of how to run a LinkedIn ad campaign from all of these campaigns we've run across all these different brands. So that's kind of what we're going to get into. But the first place to kind of really start is really just some philosophical things. And Jason and I are going to kind of go back and forth and make this conversational. And certainly put your comments, questions in the chat if you have any. So a couple of things I guess to think about first is one, LinkedIn's an awareness channel. And so we got to think about how to not only capture, but also create demand with content and messaging. And so that's a really important tenet. And if you think about LinkedIn only from a capture perspective of just generating leads, then you're missing out on a huge opportunity. We've all heard that 95% of people are out of market, 5% in market. And so we need to keep that into consideration. The other big point is to start a little bit broader, right? Now, that doesn't mean like outside your ICP, but it means focusing on people that are still a good fit for you and then slowly whittling that down. And so you might break that out into different segments like decision makers versus end users. You might have different industry segments that are less profitable or convert not as well as others, or maybe there's just audiences that are less active or more active. And so the goal is to find the most engaged people on LinkedIn as a channel and make sure we direct all of our attention to those people because they are the ones that are actually going to get the most impact from our advertising. And the last thing I'll say is, you can't measure everything the same way, right? And so we got to think about, hey, campaigns that are targeting a cold audience that is, say, brand awareness, where the predominant goal is to make them aware of who you are, right? Because they've never heard of you before. So we wouldn't really expect anyone that is trying to buy a 5K, 10K product to just convert right off that ad, right? That makes no sense. And so that means that we need to think about that campaign a little bit differently. And so we wouldn't necessarily measure it all in the same way. So I'll stop myself there. And Jason, if you want to add anything to that specifically, then we can kind of jump into it.
The only thing I would add is creating demand with educational content means not sales collateral masked as educational content.
That's a good point.
Start broad based on historical values where you've won as a company, not theoretical next pie in the sky ideas of who you want to go after. And you can't measure everything the same way. Set proper expectations. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed. Your team's going to be disappointed, and your company's going to be disappointed if you don't set the proper expectations, which we'll get into a little bit later.
Exactly. Totally agree. And I think, this kind of ties into the last point that we were just talking about too, which is that, I think the predominant view that everyone has with any type of advertising, right, is put up an ad, get someone to click it, landing page, conversion, right? And that's just the nice, simple path that we all know and love. But the reality is that the majority of people are not clicking on your ads. And that doesn't mean that they're not really impactful. That means that there's a whole lot of different other things they're doing on your ad. And so that might be copying the link. It might be snapshotting the ad. It might be searching Google after they see the ad, typing it directly in their URL box. They might tell a friend. I might say, hey, Jason, man, saw this cool app called a script, dude. We should check it out. It's pretty cool. We can edit our ums and ahs out of our conversation, stuff like that.
Yep.
Or maybe I save it out or watch a video. The point is, like, there's so many different things that can happen. And so if you're just looking at software attributed UTM parameters appended to contact, then there's a huge miss.
Well, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, yo, Jay, good idea on Slack. And I'm going to Google it direct. And I'm going to completely bypass any tracking.
Exactly. Which we do all the time, right? And we've got a Slack channel. It's cool tools. And so you guys probably have some of those in your Slack channels or communities or whatever, right? And so if I see a cool tool, usually sometimes from an ad, not always, but sometimes from an ad, I'll just kind of snapshot it or grab the link or even just go directly to the website, just pop it in the cool tools thing so that Jason and I can go back and say, hey, should we think about this for, some other things? So
our cool tools Slack channel is deconstructing tracking across the globe.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately. Yeah. So exactly. So now we talk about goals and measurement, and we could probably do a whole entire presentation on this, to be honest, but clearly we only have 30 minutes, I hope, Charity and team. But at any rate, we'll talk about at least a couple of high level takeaways. And so a couple things to mention are, right, that direct response campaigns scale differently than a brand awareness campaign. Kind of alluded to that earlier. What's a direct response campaign? Any campaign where there's literally one sole goal you want them to take. Download an ebook, download a template, get a demo, whatever it is. There's an offer at the other end of it, and you want them to just do that one thing. Brand awareness is not necessarily conversion based. The goal is predominantly just to get them exposure to the content, consume it, or consume a message from a product marketing page. And so that's the big difference. And we'll go into an example in a second, but just wanted to note there are big differences between those. We need to think about measuring them differently. In terms of consistent namings and UTM structure, Jason, you probably should actually take this one because this is your baby.
I'd say it's the most pivotal thing you can possibly do outside of actually running paid media. Because the second you don't normalize your values, both from a CRM perspective, which we should add to this little second bullet point, to make sure that things are consistent across the board of your company, not only just related to paid media, but especially in paid media, from campaigns to audiences to different tracking mechanisms, conversion tracking across Google Analytics 4 to all the various ways of which we all track things. You're going to wake up one day and you're going to have a question. And if you don't normalize the data properly, you're not going to be able to answer that question. And you're going to go down a rabbit hole of trying to figure out the answer of all this disparaging data that you didn't take the time to set up properly to begin with. So I'd say I would highlight that big.
That's a good point. And because, I mean, if you're looking at your LinkedIn ads account right now, or you're thinking about starting it and you're seeing all these different campaign names that really have no sense to them, like that's a call to action. Like we need to get those all the same, but also makes them a lot more searchable within LinkedIn. Make sure UTM parameters are all consistent. So again, just helps keep the organization. So if an agency or in-house team, or whoever's taking it over, keeps it nice and easy for them. Measure influence on leads, deals, and revenue. So this is a big one. This goes back to the point we kind of talked about with not everyone clicking on ads, right? And so we all know that happens. Of course, we'd love it if just everyone clicked our ad and had the nice, easy, simple journey, right? Because that's just easier to think about. But the reality is we can also pull data from LinkedIn's API to look at all the companies that are engaging with our ads and then merge that with data from a CRM system like Salesforce or HubSpot. And so we do this for a lot of our clients where we can say, hey, great, over the last 90 days, $1.5 million worth of pipeline has actually been influenced by LinkedIn. And what that means is just that someone has been exposed to your advertising, but maybe has not clicked, gone to the landing page and converted with UTM parameters appended. And so we want to recognize that LinkedIn's value is not just about that. So,
and what do we see? We turn on paid media, a good multi-channel approach. We see that not everything is attributable like we talked about earlier, but we see overall inbounds start to move in the right direction. And then if you pull media away, what happens? Attributable leads go down, but the potential for overall inbound to be impacted as well. So super important to take the full scope when evaluating stuff.
Exactly. And I know for some, maybe you're thinking, influence, like it's just a dirty way to take credit for everything.
Yeah.
But it's not dirty. It's maybe not source. It's not as good a source, not as fun to talk about. But the reality is, like, if you're not reporting on that, you're missing out on a huge value prop for LinkedIn. And that's what a lot of times leads to people saying, LinkedIn ads doesn't work for me. I'm not seeing any conversions in the channel, and then they just turn it off when really tons of people are being impacted. You just weren't measuring it the right way. So it's something really important to remember. So this is an example of what you might put together. Some of you who are growth managers, CFOs, CEOs, or maybe even marketers in general might have something like this, fairly simplistic. The general idea is, hey, we want to get historical metrics of what performance looked like in the past for those that have already been running LinkedIn ads or a channel. And then we're going to go ahead and make a good, better, and best scenario for different outcomes that might change, right? Based off conversion rate or the amount of money that we're spending, whatever the variable is that we're going to change. And then look down funnel and say, cool, how many leads, pipeline, or revenue does that look like? And so again, this is more for your direct response, like dollars in, dollars out type of campaign. And so we're not talking about brand awareness, consuming ungated content, things like that. We're talking about something with an offer of some kind at the other end. That's where this type of math works best.
And be realistic. Historical metrics don't lie if you use them properly, but be realistic about the good, better, and best situation. If you're going to come to the table and say, well, we're going to increase the lead to close rate by 42% because, Bob over here is just going to maximize the inbound nurture email that we have going out. All right, let's step back and actually see what the realistic goals should be based on your company today, right?
Exactly. Well, that's a good point because you and I and the rest of the Omni team has these conversations all the time. They're hard ones, right? Where you can do some of this estimation all you want, right? Doesn't mean that those things are going to necessarily happen. There's a lot of different factors. I mean, the auction is constantly changing, right? So people are bidding up, bidding down different audiences. And so you may have some historical metrics that say X, but just because you dump another $10,000 on it doesn't mean it's some linear type of scenario where you're just going to drive 10 more demos for the cost of $100 a demo. And so you'll have to kind of adjust that in your model a little bit, and it'll never be perfect ever. So the idea is just to get a general idea of like, okay, cool. We know that generally when we spend this on our retargeting campaigns, or maybe it's a gated content piece or a template that you're pushing or some type of like really, really cool offer, just keep those things in mind, because it does change the variables quite a bit. So
It's a good point. Marketing math is linear. Real life is not. Be flexible.
exactly. That's why we all love Excel spreadsheets, right?
Oh, yeah.
So then you get the other side, right? So we talked about direct response. This is kind of pulling full circle to our first couple of slides. And so then you got, say, brand awareness campaigns on LinkedIn. And just to call it out right at the end of this, keep watching, because at the end, we're actually going to show you what a structure looks like with how we layer content in a campaign. So you won't want to miss that. These are just some of the fundamental like ingredients that go into it. But this one's really important too when you think about brand awareness campaigns. And then you say, okay, great. Our goal is not necessarily to get them to convert right away, because guess what? We're not expecting anyone to buy a 10, 50K, 100K piece of software off the first campaign. Not going to happen. So like, okay, cool. So what we're going to do is just make sure that we are educating the market on what we do, how we do it, how it works, et cetera. And then we're going to use ad frequency sets, whether it be 3, 6, 10, whatever we feel comfortable with. Obviously not too much to get into an ad fatigue scenario where people are like, Jesus Christ, I hate these ads. I see them all the time, right? Then we're going to look at the size of the audience and say, hey, great, cool. Is it 100,000? Is it 50? Is it 180, et cetera? That's really, really important, because if the audience is bigger, then we're going to need to think about having a larger budget to reach that audience, or maybe reduce the audience size down if we have a smaller budget. And then the last might be if you've got a historical CPM in there, then we can lock that in. And that allows this whole calculation to work, which happy to share this if anyone wants it through DM Jason or myself on LinkedIn. But then you get a monthly budget where you can say, okay, great. Now I know if I want X frequency with this audience size, and this is my historical CPM, this is what's going to take to actually reach that audience.
And you've got to be really careful about frequency. One, don't get too afraid of a high frequency if it works and it makes sense for your company, right? Yeah. If you're selling to the enterprise, to VP level folks who are going to be in the buying stage at some level of the game, then it's going to take some nurturing over time, and you may have a higher frequency. You got to play to the audience and play to the end goal of what you're trying to sell and who you're trying to sell to.
Exactly. 100%. And the last thing I'd say is, people always say, well, how much of my budget should I dedicate to brand awareness versus direct response? I mean, come on, man, we need leads, we need pipeline, we need ops, especially it's Q4. Everyone's in crunch mode right now. And so if you're just getting into it, clearly, if you have a retargeting audience, your lowest hanging fruit is going after the people that are warm, that have already been to your website, that have already engaged with your ads. Clearly, those would be the best people to target initially. And you can do that with a relatively small budget. If you don't have a big retargeting audience, well, then guess what? You're going to need to go build it. And so you can do that obviously outside of paid, but paid's a great way to target directly the people you want to go after, your ICP, with firmographic targeting or a target account list, and get them into that bucket. So that then you can start converting those people into to leads, opportunities, et cetera. So this is something we always talk about, something kind of a tenet that we always have for any client, but especially for LinkedIn. But again, you want to optimize for opportunities, not just for the lowest cost per lead. It's great if you can get the lead cost down for sure, but not if it compromises quality, and not if it compromises the lead opportunity conversion rate. And so that's why we need to make sure that whether it's through offline conversions, or whether it's just by looking in your CRM to say, hey, great, okay, for the people that are coming from these campaigns, again, more for your kind of bottom of the funnel direct response campaigns to do this type of thing in, are we making sure that those campaigns are actually driving ops, or are they just creating a lot of leads, a lot of noise for cheap, and none of them are going anywhere? And
100%. And there's a duality with this slide and just a lot of areas of marketing. There's a trade-off with every decision that you make. If you optimize toward the conversion, fine, fair enough, that's the place to start. But if you don't look at the opportunities created, then you're missing the boat. If you optimize your paid search account for, say, impression share only, you're going to sacrifice something else down the line. You have to have dual layers of association and the way of which you approach this stuff, and because you're going to be left hanging, right? It's not as simple as just go look at this one metric. There are so many other things at play here that you have to address.
Exactly. And you can get this data back in the channel, right? And so, you and I know we've seen tons of people, right? There's a lot of people that are great at LinkedIn ads, but not so great at actually putting the whole picture together and understanding in the CRM what's actually really driving some of those activities lower down in the funnel. And so that's where it gets a little bit more tricky, but something that's really, really important for us all to think about. So targeting your ICP on LinkedIn, I mean, that goes obvious, right? Of course, we want to target our ICP. For those that don't know, it's ideal client profile, right? The best people that are a good fit for your business today, not your TAM. And so what Jason and I always say to any client we work with, or any client even we're not working with, is that start with a target account list. And so that means you get your sales team's target account list they're going after right now. Maybe it's 100, 500,000 accounts, whatever the number is, depending on how big your sales team is. Make sure that's uploaded into LinkedIn right now. If you do not have one-to-one alignment, then immediately there's a problem there. Why? We've done tests with numerous companies around this where we've seen increased conversion rates off of existing target accounts that the sales team is going after when we've also got LinkedIn ads running at the same time. Because guess what's happening? They're getting nurtured, they're getting exposure. We're playing into the familiarity bias so that when the SDR, the AE reaches out, they're like, oh shit, like I know these guys, I see them all over the place, right? Maybe even organically too, right? But from a paid perspective in this example. And so really, really important thing to keep in mind, easy in quotations to do. Theoretically, if your sales team can just give you the list, and they should have one, every sales team does. Ad exclusions, right? I mean, typical blocking and tackling of any LinkedIn ad account. Don't waste money on people you don't want to advertise to. Simple as that. Competitors, partners, investors, maybe even current customers, depending on the play. And then make sure that you don't, just look at one type of audience. There's a lot of different ways to build audiences. There's the target account list, which we just talked about. There's firmographic using titles. There's job function. There's member skills. There's groups. A lot of different options. You can use intent data from G2, 6 Sense, Bombora. All sorts of different ways. And so the point is not to make it too complex, just focus on 1 to 2 audiences in the beginning stages, understand how those audiences are performing, because you're likely going to reach different types of people. So I'll stop myself there, Jason, if you got another thought on that, but.
I don't think so. Just being specific, which we're going to lead to in this next slide, which shows the kind of the hierarchy. And to your point, the target account list is going to be the prime suspect. But then as you kind of get into the center of the circle, your ICP clearly, job titles being something very specific, job functions being a little bit less specific, seniority, and so on and so forth. The big thing here is to just, again, be realistic with your selection of target accounts that you want to add to your list. Mm-hmm. It's going to be primarily people that you've done business with in the past and the firmographics of which follow those individuals, those companies. And if you're an early company that just doesn't have it figured out yet, fair enough. Do a lot of really good testing within the firmographic section of LinkedIn or other channels. Have an assumption, go to bat with an idea and test that idea. But for the companies who do have historical data, that target account list that's a realistic look into where the won deals have come from in the past has to be the starting point.
Exactly. And your ICP may be still a bit broad right now. You may have a whole lot of, maybe you're industry agnostic, or maybe you've got some other, qualifiers in there. And so I think the really important thing, back to LinkedIn ads and testing audiences, kind of what Jason was alluding to a bit, is, we got to think about, okay, great. We got all these industries in here. Maybe there's a better performing one, right? And so when you start to look at performance within the account, which are the industries that are most engaged with your advertising? And so you might decide that, hey, let's take off the last 5, because guess what? Maybe they're just not as active on LinkedIn. That's a great learning. So that way, then you can use the same budget, not increase it, same budget, but have a higher level of frequency and reach more of the people that are the most active on LinkedIn. And so that's the game.
We could talk about this for an hour and a half, right? Or longer, for 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
But another thing that's coming to my mind is if you have ideas about industries or different firmographic, different companies that you want to expand into as a company, maybe you don't have the history with them, but you want to expand into them. Don't include them in the same type of targeting or the same campaign. Don't pretend you can just mush them all together and it's just going to work out, because it's not. Because you have to have one of 2 things: expectations for each of the different types of audiences, because you're clearly in uncharted territory with the new expansionary types of industries versus the ones you've won into in the past. And so the separation there is really important, I think. And again, that goes into our whole campaign planning and just many, many tiers of things that you need to address with paid media, but an important point.
Yeah, so true. So true. So then we get to kind of messaging and content. Again, this could be, a big area of the whole entire presentation too. But, the couple of takeaways, at least that we always see, is be clear, don't be clever. It's fun to be clever. It's the stuff that you might see on a billboard. But if you're still sitting there saying, like, what do they do and what are they selling and who's this for, then you've lost them, right? It's a wasted opportunity where you could have been a little more clear with your messaging. And again, clear doesn't mean boring and basic. It could be interesting too. It's just that we've got to get the message clear so that ultimately people understand it, and ideally in the voice of the customer, right? So that's the big thing on messaging. And so that applies to like product marketing ads, content, you name it, the whole 9 yards, your website. It's a kind of broader topic that we always talk about in marketing. The other is that in the early stages, and again, most of our advice and recommendations come from like Series A to Series C, just so everyone knows. We're not talking about really mature SaaS brands that are $1 billion plus or public companies. And so in this case, when you're building content, you really want to focus on content that directly connects back to your product somehow. And so that may be, hey, I've got these 3 problems, or I have these 8 questions. And so you start creating content out to help answer those or give them tools, templates, or ways to think about it. But your product is at the end of that answering the question of how they solve it with your product, right? And so it's not pitching the product, it's still delivering value, but the point is there's got to be some dotted line back. Otherwise, if it's just like, hey, the 5 new advertising tips, and your tool doesn't really do anything with helping them directly do that, then cool, yeah, it's a great piece of content, but people are still wondering, like, what the heck can you do? And that's where you get these brand awareness problems, and hey, why aren't we driving high intent demos and stuff like that? So.
And it's important to, be simple. And we're in the B2B space, clearly, as an agency, and a lot of you are as well. You're technical folks. You want to write and show off the technical prowess of the product and yourself as a company, right? But fight that urge in lieu of a very simple message that is clear to someone who's non-technical, because we see that too often. We see very cool products that want to show off the accolades of the tool in a technical manner, but then fail to relate the message of what's actually happening here from a capability to benefit outcome perspective. And you're going to be fighting for that audience in social and other platforms. And if you don't get that message across in a split second, they're going to bounce. They're not going to have the time for you. So you got to get them with something powerful. Even the most complex products can be made simple and easy to digest from a messaging and content perspective.
Exactly. Simple always wins. Always. It's tough though. I mean, I think people struggle with it, especially when you're the founder, the technical founder, and you're just like, oh, but it does all these cool things. We have to talk about this. And the one little widget over here that talks to that widget, that's cool. And we love widgets. They get in these crazy scenarios where it's like, okay, cool. Like, that's awesome. But there's really only like 2 or 3 things that people really care about. We just need to say these 3 things. And again, that comes from testing and learning and getting data. And so it's not like you just know that from the start, but some things to keep in mind. So in terms of like organizing content, how are we on time? So I think we can go a little bit over, I hope, unless I can't see my comment board, but someone say something if we can't. But since we were a little bit late to start, I'm going to assume we have another 5 minutes or so. So there's kind of really 4 content buckets here. So we got thought leadership, content, product marketing, social proof. In the beginning, really your focus has got to be hardcore product marketing and social proof, maybe a little bit of content, but that's really it. Thought leadership is cool, interesting stuff that we should do, but sometimes it can be a little bit too far away from the product in certain cases. And so better just to be really clear up front. What's the product do? How's it work? Is it for me? What's my life look like now? And what's my life look like with the product? And then back it up, de-risk the situation for them. And so that can be done with testimonials, case studies, third-party reviews from G2, whole number of different things. But the point is people want to know that there's already a lot of cool people using this tool. Hopefully, maybe they have a following. They're an influencer. They're someone well-known in the industry, ideally. Those do really, really well. And so if we can use that, then that's like, okay, cool, great. Well, if they're already using it, then I guess I may as well try it out. And now I get what it does because they did a really good job doing product marketing types of ads. And so I'll stop myself there, but that's kind of the core nuts and bolts of this. We could go into details more. What that really leads to then is like, all right, well, then how do we put that into ad creative? And so there's lots of things to kind of think about here. And I'll go through a couple, and Jason, I'm sure has some thoughts too. But it goes back to clear and not clever. And so drive more conversions with shorter forms. Most people know Clearbit, pretty darn clear. It's not only talking about the outcome, but it's also talking about what it is, which is great. And so it's doing both things at the same time. And then at the same time, the visual also matches up really well with the headline. So it's not just a random asset or any kind. It's something that actually raised, okay, cool. So when I put in my email address, got it, it's going to fill in these additional fields. And so that creates the connect for people. So stop myself there, and Jason, if you want to add some things to it too, but
I think it's perfect, and it speaks for itself in a matter of speaking. There's a version of this message that they didn't write, which is not on the screen in front of us, which has to do with advanced APIs and integrations with your backend in order to make forms more accessible. That's what they didn't write. What they wrote is drive more conversions with shorter forms. Everybody understands that. You don't have to understand what an API is to get the message, right? Back to that simplicity.
Exactly. And again, so much to say. We could go on for probably hours on this, but a few high-level pointers. And again, we'll make sure the presentation is loaded up wherever so you guys can access it. Another thing to think about here, some just easy kind of practical templates and takeaways, no theory or anything like that in terms of creating great engaging ads. These happen to be a couple of product marketing related ads. And so you've got the before and after, you've got, hey, what's the thing you can do and the capability it does, or what's a question that a lot of people have, and then how does your product answer with a visual, or what's a big problem maybe they're unaware or maybe they're aware about, but it's something that's top of mind, like, yeah, you're right, shit, invalid visits will never convert. I don't want invalid visits from bots. How do I solve that problem? Well, you do it with Clixies, so on and so forth. And so these are some examples you can kind of think about. We've done thousands and thousands of ads for companies. These are probably the 4 most used and the ones that also perform the best. There's lots of different variations clearly in ad creative, but if you're looking for a starting point, this is a pretty good one.
And we probably won't be able to get through the landing page slides. So I'd say that these frameworks and this methodology also applies to your website, right? Yeah. The best sections for a landing page involve the before and after, what life looks like today versus what life looks like tomorrow with your product, right? The capabilities, the questions buyers have outlined not only in navigation, but in the actual copy and sections to support their journey, because it's their journey, not your journey you're sending them down, right? Exactly. So it's super important to carry the message through and the framework.
Totally. And to your point, I think, and these are a couple of examples of ads, I think what I want to do just with the time we have is maybe even jump down to, which we only have a couple more slides, but jump down to like what it would actually look like in terms of the campaign structure with a lot of the ingredients that we just talked to. And so let's just jump there real quick, and then we can kind of debrief here, and always feel free to reach out to Jason and I with questions, but this might be a possible campaign structure. And so the real short of this is you're looking at the cold layer on top, prospecting, warm layer on bottom, retargeting. Retargeting is people that have been to your website, engaged with ads. Prospecting, people that haven't engaged with you over a 180-day period or have never engaged with you, never heard about you. And so you might have campaigns in the pink, different squares there that represent different audiences or different objectives focused on pushing different types of things. In this case, you might have some of the product marketing ads that we mentioned earlier to make sure people understand what it is, how it works, et cetera, because that's really important if the audience doesn't have any context around that before. Or you might actually use some content to answer questions or a problem they have, and then it does it in a slightly, lighter way, right? It's not quite as, hey, here's what we do, here's how the product works, et cetera, et cetera. It's, hey, here's something that's really a really cool template that helps you build out a campaign brief. Here's the 1, 2, 3 step with an example. And hey, if you want to do this automatically, go get our tool. And so that might be an example of something tofu that, again, has the dotted line back to the content, but is still value-led and not too pitchy on product. And so then once you get them engage in that layer, rolling them down to retargeting, and that's all about just building trust and credibility through some of the things that we just talked about. Social proof, offers, again, reminding them again what you do from a product marketing perspective. So I'll kind of leave it at that, unless Jason, you want to add another point here, and then we can kind of
I just say that, we're focusing a lot of this conversation on B2B, and there may be folks out there who are a little bit different, and maybe B2B and possibly with a PLG motion. So there's going to be a world, because none of this is just black and white. This is one example of a plan, and we morph thousands of these plans for our clients, right? But there may be a world where retargeting takes precedent. And that means that people who abandon carts, for example, or they signed up for a free trial for a B2B software that's PLG led. Well, let's nurture them to the phase of actually purchasing. There are different ways to structure this. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing. Like I always say, marketing is not magic. It's a means of communication. You got to figure out how to communicate with your audience at the end of the day. And every audience is going to be different, right? So I think it's a good look at a B2B plan of the many that we curate, right, Jonathan? But
yeah,
it definitely needs to be adapted to your own methodology.
It's a great point. Exactly. Yeah. There's no one playbook, one framework to rule them all. We all know that. So, well, cool. Well, we'll kind of give you guys back the time, or whoever's up next. And, if you guys have any questions about running paid, we do not only LinkedIn, but Google, YouTube, kind of you name it, across any channel, ad creative, as well as conversion tracking, kind of pull that all together to ultimately drive pipeline for a lot of our clients. So happy to help if we can, or just have a casual chat on LinkedIn. So appreciate the time, guys.